My name is Asaf Degani, and I'm a researcher at NASA. And my research interest, the work I do, has to do with how people interact with information primarily, and how that relates to the design of commercial airliners' cockpits, specifically, and also spacecraft cockpits. And it addresses one of the fundamental problems that we have today, where we have enormous amount of information which is available for us, but that doesn't mean you understand what is really going on, and how to try to compress and compact that information so it's readily available for critical decisions, aborts during launches, failures or emergencies on a commercial airliner where pilots have to make quick decisions and there's not a lot of time to query information. Those are the kind of things that I work on. And in terms of so a lot of that has to do, of course, with research, and part of my work is also to distribute this research to the community being manufacturers of airplanes, pilot unions, or people that actually use this equipment and have to know how to use it properly. And also, I tried also, and also the academic community that I live in, that's guarding and there to support and make sure that the information is correct and valid. And also, I've also tried, and this relates to the book, in Taming Hell, which is a previously book that I've written a couple years ago, to provide that to the public. People experience information overload, people experience automation, even in the camera that you're using here, and cars and medical equipment, but people really don't understand what goes behind that and how that can actually harm you if you not know what you're doing. And sometimes, of course, there's design failures that people need to be aware of. So part of my responsibility as a civil servant, because I work for NASA, is also to provide that, and that's the way I do it. The researcher's role, specifically a researcher in technological domains, is to try to develop theories and methods for improving our lives, in my case, making airplanes safer, making them much more robust to failures, and trying to prevent accidents. So in my work, what I try to do is to develop ways in which you can enhance the safety, and let's talk about airplanes, because that's what the public is more familiar with, to try to make them safer. So that means you're developing methods, ideas to how to improve and how to invent new ways of, in my case, looking at information. Now, part of the challenge here has to do with the fact that there's quite a long cycle in research development and actual implementation in an airliner cockpit or a spacecraft. And the research takes several years for it to mature, and starting from an idea to something, a concept that's tested, evaluated, and found to be a valid one that has a significant contribution. And then goes the process of how that's taken by a manufacturer and made into an actual product. And even that's not the end of the cycle. Then it has to be ingrained in, trained on. So you're talking about cycles of 10 or 15 years.
And you're the first step in that?
And I'm the first step in that. So in many cases, I have to think 15 years into the future, anticipating what kind of problems will occur there, and try to make sure. And because the cycle is so long and so difficult, I have to try to ballpoint to the right place, because many times you're maybe going in this way and technology is going the other way, and you have lost many, many years. And that happens. And so in terms of research, what we do, we have a realization of a certain need that's out there, or a certain problem, sometimes accidents that are popping up over and over again. People are trying to find, okay, there's a pattern between them. What is really causing it? So that's maybe part of the research. You begin to see the buds of a problem, of an accident waiting to happen, and you want to pick that up. And so there's a research in terms of picking the signal among the noise. And that would mean doing surveys, doing data analysis of incidents, and doing interviews with pilots, reviewing accident reports. There's a lot of information that can be gathered and arranged to give you a map of what's going to happen 15 years ahead. So that's, the first part. And then comes the second part, which is not, it's not linear. It's more of, okay, how do I solve this problem? And usually it's not that you sit there and, wake up in the morning and here's an idea. But rather in understanding the scope of the problems, the solutions come up on their own. And that's something that over time you become to be more sensitive to, or with experience you're more relaxed, and it will come, it will show up. And then comes the, I wouldn't say the fun part, but certainly a more extremely creative part of how do I solve it? How do I design a new way of looking, in my case, information, so that you can do certain things, you can pack a lot of information, you can still be sensitive to what is happening in your system, airplane, spacecraft. And then once you have a concept, you begin to actually build it. And that means a lot of, so you have, in my case, I have to hire a computer scientist or a programmer to develop this, and beginning to see, and all of a sudden, things that you didn't think about actually happening. And in many cases, it has to do with how you process the data, and then after that comes the stage of where you're ready to do experimentations with actual subjects or pilots or people that have to use it, some with more experience, some with less experience. So generally, initially, you try with people who are reasonably cheaper to get, or you can get a lot of them, and that's usually graduate students. Once you understand that, you move to like pilots, more difficult to get, more expensive, and so forth and so forth. And then in my case also, I don't do this in a vacuum. I have to read what's been done. I have to read of other people's experiments. Again, it's a way of mapping. What are all the connections in this specific problem that you're trying to address? Because I work, I work for an agency that has a mission, so there's a specific problem that I need to address. I'm not just doing research in the vacuum, and not that anybody does any research in the vacuum. There has to be some kind of incentive to do it. But in my case, it's a very clear incentive about flight safety, making airplanes safe, spacecraft safe, and addressing some of the challenges of the future. So I have to be aware of what's out there. And some things that need to be, may not be the classical academic research. They could be more popular books that we talked about that just kind of, some ideas that are floating out there. And sometimes they involve going to the museum and seeing some other related fields, and then you begin to pick up between fields. So it's something you have to expose yourself to. I found for myself that a museum, an art museum, is a very kind of a liberating experience for me. So because I have to deal with information, and that usually involves spaces, abstract spaces, geometrical spaces, and these kind of problems have been dealt with in art, not in the true mathematical sense. But if you look at abstract art, Cubism, Picasso with the woman with the multiple faces, and it was at the women of Avalon, or I forgot the exact name, where he's exploring on a single picture, he's showing you multiple faces of the same figure or set of figures. These are the concepts that I have to deal with, because I may be dealing with, you know, 3, 4, 5-dimensional spaces. So being exposed to what an artist is exploring helps tremendously, or helped me tremendously. Yeah, what seemingly looks outside, but they're all addressing the same problem. And that also relates to some of the work that I'm doing now in this new book, which has to do with medieval art, where same problems that we're exploring today were explored there, implemented through architecture and ornament design. And that's a huge well that I'm exploring, or taking enormous amount of insights from to do the work. I think what is really important, and this is really important for students, is the understanding that in order to address a problem, and every researcher in a way addresses a problem. It may be even a philosophical problem, a theological problem, a biological problem, or something that bothers him or her, and they're trying to get their hands on it. It's fuzzy, it's murky. People have tendency or feeling that, you know, something is happening there, but really don't understand it. And that's actually what led many, many researchers or great scientists to avenues where people say, oh, you know, like wonderful example is Freud. So people knew about the unconscious. They were people that dealt with it, but he was able to say, oh, this is a very interesting field. I'm going to go into it and try to map it. And so he's mapping it to us, and then all of a sudden a new field evolves, a new opening, a new understanding of how we as humans react. So I'm going back into this idea of trying to center your problem within a large space or a map, and you're trying to map, what is this problem? What's connected to it? What affects it? And as you do this, create this virtual map for yourself, you begin to see how it affects other things, and all of a sudden you have a much more mature understanding of it. And what is fascinating about that in that process of building that map, that roadmap of your specific problems or problem, all of a sudden you see areas that are really solutions. They just kind of pop up from below. And it's those that after you understand the problem, you say, oh, okay, well, I can begin to see where the solution pops up. A certain theoretical framework that once you have it, like, wow, oh my God, we understand it. We know how to prevent it. Or, wow, we understand it. Geez, look what it's giving us when we take it to another area, or we take it to something which is related to that. All of a sudden, you begin to see. And it's that kind of aha moment is really what I think, you know, researchers, scientists, and, you know, even lay people, when all of a sudden something new, you read, you understand, and all of a sudden, wow, you know, I'm seeing the ocean. And, you know, that's a very kind of human thing, you know, that's what we live for. It's for those. I don't look for answers. I first try to map the problem. I first look for the questions, and begin by looking at relationships that exist. Oh, you know, this happened in this situation, and a similar thing happened in that situation. I'm saying, okay, these are different situations, but there's kind of something linking those two. And I'm trying to put those links together. I one time had this research study, which was a very interesting one that I spent several years on, and had to do with a certain mathematical description of how a certain piece of automation in the airplane works. It's actually a very critical piece of automation. And it has to do with how airplanes land automatically, which is without human governance or human control. So it's a very critical system. And I got a tip about a certain problem with that system from a pilot who I interviewed for another project, a totally unrelated project. And he said, so we talked about the project that I was doing at the time that had to do with procedures, and he says, yeah, you talk about procedures, but there's a certain problem that we have encountered in this specific airplane that has to do with this feature. And we could never really understand it. And we asked the engineers, they didn't understand that. We called the company, they never understood that. And that triggered my interest. So I asked him, what was it? He says, well, nobody really understands what it is. And when a researcher hears that, nobody really understands that, that's your winning point. Okay, I'll try to understand that. For myself, I do two things. I keep a notebook, which I write with my hands, notes, ideas. It's by my bedside, and it's in a kind of an evolving document of the research, and sometimes related research, not just one. It's not that I have one for every project. I have one, and then I begin to collect information and put them in files or in the computer or outside the computer, and I begin to assemble the pieces of this map. And of course, sometimes you read something and you thought about it in a certain way, and then you read something else and you think, well, that you could think about it another way, and then you have to go back to it. So you want to have that available to you. Sometimes read things again. So I created kind of a depository of these concepts. Part of what you do in research is you talk to people. So it could be a taxi driver, it could be your spouse, it could be your kid, it could be a respected scientist. It doesn't, and you talk to people and you try to articulate to them what you're doing, and then it's amazing how much of cues and concepts and ideas you get from other people. And also in the process of you trying to articulate that to a taxi driver, you find that, I never thought about it this way. And it actually helps you progress. So bouncing ideas, talking, in my case, I give lectures or presentations about these topics, even though that fairly early on, I have something and I'm beginning to share that and get concepts and ideas, feedback on these. I had, I think it was one case, it was a taxi driver, somehow he asked me what I do for a living, and I kind of briefly, and he said, well, that sounds like rocket science. I said, well, it's actually not. It has to do with the problems that you have on a daily basis. So I went through explaining to him. He was quite an inquisitive kind of a person. And in that process, I was trying to give him a framework of how it works. And I found myself, wow, I never thought about it this way. And actually used it later on in the work itself. And it came from a taxi driver. I'm not really too methodological about these notes. I have them. They're arranged in a folder, which I call the project folder, and sub-project or certain areas of interest that I've explored or did analysis for are there listed with their name. For example, one topic that I'm doing now has to do with certain patterns that we used for training astronauts on the lunar model. So I have a folder that I created yesterday called Lunar Model, Lunar Module, that has some of that information. It's there. I don't link them in any way. It's just listed there. And I look at them from time to time, but I don't have a really methodological way of organizing them. The way it's organized for me is more in how I go into this project on a daily basis. So I have to visit and revisit this problem, and I try to revisit it at least for 3 hours or 4 hours a day. The rest of my day is consumed with meetings, administrative work, like everybody else. The way that I think about research and writing also is it's like a daily exercise. It's a daily I don't know what the word, a thing that I do. That's what I live for. I read an interview of Leonard Cohen. I'm not sure if the audience knows who Leonard Cohen is, but and he was interviewed about the way he was writing, and he was talking about how he comes in every morning to do his 3 or 4 hours, or as long as it takes, and he sits by his desk and he begins to work on his poetry. And in his case, certain pieces, it takes him 6 months to come up with a song, because he works it and works it. And I do the same thing. I come to it again, and I try to come to it fresh, and I revisit it. And the way that I revisit it, in this project that has to do with information and information spaces, I revisit it by going through a process of using my hand to draw certain patterns or geometrical patterns, and it usually tends to free my mind so I can go into these spaces. That's one way, and we can talk about this more later. Another way is by coming into a certain manuscript that I write, and I don't start with a book or a big report, or it could be a 5 or 6 page conference paper that I feel that by now I have an understanding of something. A certain maturity has come. Now it's time to present that, and now I have to integrate all that I understand into a 6-page. And then I come to this in the morning, and I begin to revisit it again. And the nice thing is that if you do that and there's a lot of commitment into that, because sometimes, who wants to do that? It'd be nice to just do some emails. But it's that revisiting on a daily basis that at the end gives you progress, which then you feel comfortable and happy about. Yes, and I think it's very true about research, because you can come to it in the morning and say, there's no way I'll get over that hill. But you say, well, I didn't come today to get over the hill. I'm just coming today to move the little step forward. And the nice thing about this is you think, this is going to be the most crummiest day ever. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm tired. My body's hurting. But you say, okay, I just come to do my 3 hours. And then you sit there and you begin to either rearrange text or rearrange certain geometrical forms. And all of a sudden, something opens up. And it's a wonderful day. I think what I enjoy about research is the certain elevation that happens when you come to terms. And I'm not talking about research you want to find, what's the closest theater to your home, or I'm talking about research where you're going into, rather difficult problems, and you understand them. There's a certain feeling of elevation that you kind of elevated yourself and you have a broader picture. Now sometimes, and it doesn't happen many throughout a career or like mine, there are moments when you know that you have seen something that nobody has ever seen before. And you get such a huge jolt out of that. And I'm sure the people that do biology and physics, there's a feeling of exhalation that you have seen something that was never seen before. And it's actually interesting that in my case, I think there were 2 cases that in my life that I saw something that I knew that nobody's ever seen before, and I have to document that, and that's what you do. So these are big moments, and I think they need to be recognized, and you have to appreciate them. But there's also small points, small moments where you thought about something in a certain way and then found, and actually if you look at it this way, it's the right way to look at it. Wow. And there's no big, it's not, But it's even those little moments that all of a sudden you understand something. Sometimes it's really small, but they give you a sense of, wow, I've seen something that I certainly haven't seen before. And those are very sweet moments. Writing is a very lonely, is a very kind of a lonely endeavor. And I think one of the challenges in writing and doing research for a book, and that again, you have to wake up for it every day and not get, sometimes you're upset with it, sometimes you feel frustrated, sometimes you feel depressed from it, sometimes you feel there's no way this will ever materialize to something significant. And I think one of the most difficult things about writing is the it is part of the writing. It happens to everybody, but you have to go through it and show up for your work every day. So there's an element of writing which is a very lonely. It's sometimes the door is closed because you don't want to hear anybody, and at the same time, it's also a very public endeavor where you talk to people about your research, a taxi driver, somebody in the elevator, a colleague, a friend, a spouse, millions of people that are actually involved in your research, and sometimes they of course help you, some more, some less, depending on where they are in time and space. So you have this kind of a two persona going on. One is the kind of closed in who has to scoop for himself to put this on paper or to integrate ideas and concepts. That's a very lonely process. And even people that work in teams, it's still a very, very lonely process. The team is there for feedback, but the scooping, the real scooping of that internal thing that you have to say and how difficult that is a very lonely process. At the other side, if you just stay in that, it could be very miserable. So, there's the people around you. In the book, there's your editor, people that, co-authors, people that are with you, friends and colleagues that, like you said, are part of that acknowledgement section. But you have to always remember at the end, if there's criticism that comes in, it comes only to one person. And that's really your responsibility as a writer. Your responsibility to your audience, to your reader. And I think it's a good responsibility. It's not it's not a heavy responsibility. You're trying to do the best you can in the most honest and fair way, and that's the responsibility. And also, I sometimes think I think I'm more sensitive to it after I published my first book, is that there's an audience out there. People that would want to buy your book, people that come to your book talks, and people that email you, I read your book here and this and this and that. You begin to sense that there's also another kind of perimeter around you, and that you have responsibility for that perimeter. You want to not necessarily entertain them, but when what you're trying to highlight or show them, there are faces associated with that. And I think for a first-time writer, this could be very scary. Gosh, what would he say if I made a mistake? They'll think, you get to your second book, you're a little bit more relaxed about that. But you begin to appreciate that there are people who would read, your readers, and you certainly have responsibility to them, or you want to take them to a certain plane that you have worked so hard to get to. And there's actually a certain joy in that. You think about, so here's a person who would read, he would, what would happen? Well, he would feel this, have this reaction, that reaction. It's a wonderful thing to think about that. And I think that once you become aware of that audience, so for example, writing research papers or journals or publications, you're thinking about the reviewers. You're thinking about how you're best trying to communicate what you know. So you begin to think about the them. But but I think in the research world and in the scientific or academic world, you think about them as people who will critique your work, right? So your mindset is, how do I appease them? How do I make them relax? Once you're in the book writing, then your audience is different. They're not necessarily out there to criticize this or that point, or instead of 2, you said 1, and gosh, I found it. But more people who would read your work and say, oh, wow, I never thought about it this way. And it's those that you are writing to, and as I mentioned earlier, there's a certain joy in doing that.